Hey, everybody. Today, we're going to kind of change gears a little bit. And instead of talking about some theoretical math, we're going to try to take an approach to some everyday math. You know, the stuff that you would use every day towards making financial decisions. And one of those topics that we want to talk about today is the idea of a budget. You'll see on the screen that a budget is just a plan for how you're going to spend your money each month. Sometimes budgets could be weekly. Sometimes they could be annually. But for most of us, when we're talking about a good, useful budget, we're talking about each month. So one of the things that we use a budget for is to ensure that we don't go into debt, that we're not spending more than what we have. And so it comes back to the title that what we want to do is we want to make good financial decisions. And so for us then, a good budget is one that has a balance of zero. Now, you may be looking at that going, but wait a second, why is a balance of zero good? We'll talk about that. But really what it is that every dollar is accounted for. It does not mean that we spend every dollar, but every dollar is accounted for. So what we need to do in order to make a good budget is we need to talk about the things that go into a budget. And then I want to spend some time giving you some time to work through some of the things that you would be spending money on or using money for each month. Okay, let's jump in with some terminology. Okay, you can see up on the screen now what we're talking about specifically is the idea of expenses. And I'm hoping that everybody is familiar with the term expenses. But maybe we weren't familiar with the fact that expenses can be broken up a number of ways. Personally, for people, we can talk about expenses in ways. Businesses talk about expenses in certain ways. What we're going to discuss today is breaking up expenses into two categories, that being variable and fixed. And so you'll see in the first paragraph, when we're talking about variable expenses, we're talking about expenses that change over time. Now, I'm hoping the fact that those expenses change is what helps drive your understanding for why it's called variable. They vary. Some variable expenses are necessary. So when we talk about whether something is variable or not, it makes no reference to whether you need to spend your money on that or not. It's not about need, it's not about want. It's about, does the dollar amount change over time? So such things where we might need to spend money is like food. You need to eat. But some other variable expenses are optional. They're more wants, such as entertainment. The second paragraph goes into what we call fixed expenses. And these are expenses that are the same dollar amount every single time period. And so what we talk about that then is on a regular interval. And normally that's monthly or yearly. And so where the word fixed comes in is it's the same amount all the time. Now, if we were to talk about budgets monthly, then what we would be looking at are some things that would be fixed monthly. However, if something is fixed yearly or annually, then they're still fixed, even though you may be doing your budget for a shorter time period. So make sure that we don't put an idea in our mind that it has to be the same amount for that time period. No, fixed expenses are dollar amounts that do not change. They are the same. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to just kind of start making up a list. That is, could you make up a list of some of the things that would fall under variable expenses and the fixed expenses categories? So I want you to take a moment to just try to consider for you. What would be things where you would spend your money where the dollar amount would change every time period? Let's use month as our example. And then try to come up with some things where the dollar amount you would spend would be exactly the same every month. Okay, I want you to try to make your list. Don't try to fill in the chart. Like, don't try to fill it all up with all of this space. No. I want you to think about the ways that you spend your money in a certain time period. So list out those things. Okay, pause the video now. Okay, we're back. So in terms of going through and coming up with some things, I think it would probably be pretty safe for us to maybe say that there's a level of food that would be a variable expense for us. We've talked about it up to this point. The chances of food costing the exact same amount every single time period, let's call it every single month, I think is unlikely. When you start to address food, though, really for a lot of us, that's probably, like dining out, like eating out. You go and you pick up McDonald's on lunch, that sort of thing. Now, maybe that McDonald's on lunch is the same amount every single day, but it would still probably be a variable expense for us. I think maybe some other things that we might end up considering. If you're starting to work your way through entertainment as a general classification for us. Like, I think entertainment for us is probably going to be pretty flexible. Like, that is, it could vary greatly over a time period. Maybe you're going to a movie once a week. Well, the movie's cost would be the same thing, the same amount, but maybe now you're grabbing popcorn. You lumped it all into one category. Maybe you and your friend are just going to hang out somewhere and there's going to be a fee that's cost with that. Entertainment, generic category. I'm not sure either if we were to go something very general, like what about clothing? Do you purchase your own clothing? If you do, the chances of that being the same amount every single month, very unlikely. So I would guess, and I'm just going to put like a little wavy line under my list, that would be my guess for you in terms of what you would come up with for variable expenses. If we were going to talk about fixed, then probably one thing that is pretty fixed, if you pay for it yourself, probably your phone bill. Probably has the same billing rate every single month. You might be on a plan that makes it the exact same payment every single month. Perhaps that's a parent's expense and you do not pay for your phone. So it wouldn't even come under that heading for you. Okay, well, maybe we go to a gym. Like maybe you have your gym membership and you pay for that monthly. Maybe like streaming services. Like maybe I just put something on in general for streaming services. I'm not sure, what that would fall under. Is that a phone expense? Would you have lumped that under phone if it was something like Spotify? Is a streaming service something that you would have lumped under entertainment? Well, if it's a streaming service, then you're probably paying the same amount every single month. Like if you're on Disney, then you're paying the same amount every month. But maybe you buy some movies, like a pay-per-view sort of thing. Like you're going to end up buying and paying a certain... So maybe that's where it becomes a separate expense under entertainment for those pay movies. My guess would be that those would probably be maybe 3 of the pretty big headings that you would encounter in terms of fixed. Okay, what I want you to do now, I want you to try to fill in the bottom of the box. And same thing as what we did before. Do not go and spend your time trying to just fill in space. But what I want you to do is try to consider what the variable expenses and fixed expenses would be for a parent. So with the adult that you are living with, what do you think their variable and fixed expenses would be? Okay, same thing. I want you to try to fill in as many as you can think of. Okay, pause it now. Okay, we're back. So maybe some of the things that you could have come up with. I'm going to start with fixed in these cases because I do think that there's some things with regards to rent, paying the same amount every single month to rent a place to live, or if you own it, then maybe it's a parent's mortgage. Maybe that goes along with the same sort of thing like a car payment. Like maybe there's a car loan that you have or that your parent has. If we were to think about some other stuff, like maybe this is where a cable bill, like the amount you pay for Bell or Cogeco or Rogers, is the same amount every single month. And then maybe we get down to things like car insurance or home insurance, those sorts of things. My guess is that orange probably rounds out most parents' experience in terms of fixed expenses. Things that would fall under variable, things that are not the same every month. Well, we already have food up top in terms of dining out, but this might be one where I would say like groceries. Like it would be freakish if every single time you walked out of Metro or Superstore or Food Basics and your bill was the exact same every week. So groceries are going to be a variable expense. We talked about renting or mortgage. What about utilities? As we get into utilities, things like hydro, gas, water, those would all likely be things that vary month to month. Now, there is maybe a little asterisk that we could put beside that because some people choose something called equal billing. And so for hydro, gas, or water, they may choose to have a predicted amount taken out each month. And so maybe that would fall under the fixed expenses. Maybe if we're talking about the car payment, well, cars require gas. Some do. But even if you were talking about a hydro, then probably the way you're charging your car is going to change monthly. And then, home ownership, car ownership, you have things like repairs, things that pop up on an irregular basis, home maintenance, all those sorts of things would probably fall under the variable expenses. Again, not the same every time period. So when you take a look at that chart that we filled in, I'm thinking the blue probably gives us a pretty decent perspective from your stance. And then maybe just some things to consider in orange for our parents. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to take a look at a key component that we've kind of left out of consideration when building a budget. Okay. So what you see at the top of the screen here is us bringing in that other very important component, that being savings. And so maybe one of the things that we highlighted at the beginning of today was the idea that we wanted a budget to have a balance of 0. And then I could have had a bunch of people say, yeah, but wait a second, if my budget has a balance of 0, then that's not good because that means I'm spending all of my money. And wait a sec, I want to save some. And this is where savings comes into play. That savings becomes a key component, a category of your budget. That you actually use that as a category that fits in with expenses. One of the rules that's often framed, it's not really like a rule, but it's a suggestion, is something called the 50-30-20 rule. And really it's just a tool to set up your budget and break your budget up into different categories. So rather than focusing in on expenses and saying, okay, well, we've got variable expenses and fixed expenses, really what we're going to say is we're going to say that of all the money that comes in, that we get, our income, we're going to break that up into 3 categories. Really, it is 2 big categories. And this first 50 and 30 are really our expenses. That's the way that we're going to spend money. Rather than focusing in on whether it's fixed or whether it varies, we're going to look at it from the standpoint of what do you need to spend versus what do you choose to spend? What do you want to spend? And so a great suggestion is if you can build and then adhere to, stick to a budget where about 50% of your income goes towards needs. Things like shelter. So is that rent? Is that your mortgage? All the things that go with that. Utilities. insurance. And then 30% goes to your wants. Okay, these are things that you just want to spend. This is maybe the clothing expense we talked about, some entertainment expense. We're often going to disagree at times between what makes up a need versus what makes up a want. Like I might argue to you, there's certain aspects of your phone bill that would fall into a category of maybe a want versus a need. Is it possible to get by in today's world the same way without a phone? What do you need access to on your phone? And does that then become a need, or you just want to have that? Like I could make a big argument for a lot of us. Streaming services would be one where we might have a lot of disagreement. I would have a bunch of people that I think would tell me, no, I need it. Like I can't survive without my music. But do you really want it? Is it really a need? So when we make up our budget, we've got to be very particular about those things. And one of the suggestions is take half of your income, and you want to make sure that half of your income goes towards your needs. Another 30% goes towards your wants. And if you do that, then you're going to make sure that you have this 20% that goes into savings. And if you are saving 20% of your income, then you're in a pretty good financial position. Okay, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the 50-30-20 rule, and we're going to see it in practice. So what I want to do now is I want to actually build a budget. And so I want you to take a look at example 1. Armin works retail in the mall. He's paid an hourly wage of $15.50 per hour, and he works approximately 20 hours each week. What's he working for? For spending money and to save for post-secondary. So what is Armin's before tax earnings in 1 month? And we'll assume that a month has 4 weeks. For problem B, Armin falls into the 5.05% tax bracket for Ontario. How much money does he have when the taxes have been taken off? Something that's referred to as your take-home pay or your net pay. Okay, what I want you to do, I want you to pause the video and work your way through A and B and see if we can match up. Okay, pause it now. Okay, we're back. So if you worked your way through, how much money in A, what is Armin's before tax earnings? So that would be something that would be referred to as gross earnings. Well, if I had to calculate that, then I'm going to take his hourly wage of $15.50. He works approximately 20 hours per week. And so I could calculate that red right now to figure out, on average, how much money does he make per week. But I think I'm just going to multiply that by 4 right away to get his average monthly income. And so if I calculate all of that stuff together, then I'm going to find that Armin's going to make $1,240 gross. $1,240 before any taxes come off. Okay, we take a look at B. B, there's Armin falls into a tax bracket, so we know how much tax is going to come off of his gross pay. What does that leave him with afterwards? Well, I would hope that we didn't fall back into like an old approach, since the question doesn't ask us for how much tax does he pay, but instead it asks how much money does he have once the taxes have come off. I really don't want to take my 5.05% of that amount and calculate it. I really don't care how much is coming off. Although I could do that in the green, find that dollar amount, and then take that 1,200 or 1,240 and subtract it off. My suggestion instead, find out how much is left over. Well, if 5.05% is coming off, then if I take that 5.05 off of my 100%, then I know that his net pay is 94.95% of his gross. And so what I'm going to calculate then is 95. And I'm going to calculate that of my 1,240. Okay, when I make that calculation, I'm going to be pushing buttons on that thing. And when I do, I'm going to have to round off to 2 decimal places. Fortunately, that works out to 2 decimal places for me, and I get exactly $1,177.38. Okay, you can go through, deal with it the green way. But again, as I said, the question doesn't ask for how much tax does he pay. Hopefully we're dealing with finding out the blue percentage that we need and just calculating that directly in purple. Okay, a couple quick little calculations about us building. We now have the ability to calculate the income part of a budget. We would know, for instance, if we were going to build a budget for Armin, that when we build that budget, he's got $1,177.38 to spend. Okay, let's jump on to the next problem. So take a look at the screen now, and you'll see our example 2. We're going to talk about Hannah. Hannah's 19. She has a monthly income. You can see there $2,382. And then she has a list of the following fixed expenses or categories. You'll also notice at the bottom, some of her hobbies include going out to eat with friends, going on some trips with some girlfriends to Toronto. They go on some shopping weekends. They like to go to the movies. So these are the things Hannah likes to do for interest. Okay, if you then look at the bottom of your page, we're going to go through and we're going to build a budget. So what we want to do is we want to create a realistic, balanced budget, zero balance, for Hannah that's going to include the list of fixed expenses that I gave you, plus some variable expenses for how Hannah likes to spend her time. Yes, I understand that some of those things that we talked about with respect to fixed expenses, like groceries, may change from month to month or week to week. So they don't have the same. Hydro may change a little bit. Water may change. We're going to treat all of these things as fixed. The gas component to transportation. Well, maybe Hannah's worked out that it really is, $50 per week in gas. Okay. We're going to include all of those items as fixed expenses. I would like you to come up with, what do you think would be a very reasonable amount for Hannah to spend on some of the things that she likes to do for fun? So when we talk about like going through and dining out, and some of the other things that you could list down below, given what you see in the problem as Hannah's interests. What I want you to do, come up with a list of things. We're going to complete the dollar amounts for fixed expenses. You are then going to try to come up with what you think is a decent amount for our variable expenses. Then what I'd like us to do, since we are talking about a balanced budget, zero balance, what we're going to do is we're going to deal with a little equation, a little relationship. I want you to take your total fixed, add it to your total variable, and then, using the amount that Hannah wants to include for savings, make sure that we balance out to $2,328 for that month. Okay, your job. Go through, find all those parts you need to, come up with appropriate costs. If you need to talk to a neighbor about some of those variable expenses and what you might think would be a reasonable amount to include for that. And let's see how we do in building up that balanced budget. Okay, pause the video now. Okay, we're back. So you can take a look and see that I filled in all of the fixed expenses, all those dollars amount that Hannah assumes. And if we go through and we total all of that up on the bottom, with the exception of savings, then we should come in on a dollar amount of $1,879. You'll notice I've highlighted savings there because savings isn't a fixed expense. It's just an amount that Hannah's been setting aside every month. So in terms of that calculation, hopefully we have those dollar amounts. Okay, what does that now mean for variable? Well, if I went to go backwards now, I can see that the total of that amount is $1,929 when I put together those two. And if I now find out the difference, then I'm going to notice that Hannah has $399 to spend on total variable. So if I just got rid of that mess underneath, then I'll notice that $1,879 plus $399 plus $50 in savings gets me up to a zero balanced budget. That means I have a total variable cost of $399 per month. Okay. You take a peek at some of the stuff that you put into those variable expenses, and we need to see how well does that match up. Okay? If you had some trouble coming up with some variable expenses, then take another moment, talk with a neighbor, and try to see if you can come up with some reasonable amounts. Even if you have to do a little bit of research, then we need to find what is an amount that you would say you would include for dining out. You know, takeout, eating food out, something different than your groceries. It also said that Hannah likes to go on trips with her friends down to Toronto for shopping weekends. Well, then she's going to end up doing some shopping. Now, I don't want to say that that's necessarily clothes. We'll just call it shopping in general. And then she likes to go to the movies. Now, how often does she go to the movies? Like, maybe is she going once a week? Is she going a couple times a month? Don't know. Okay, so as I said, come up with reasonable amounts to spend on dining out, doing a little shopping, and movies. We know that in order to have a balanced budget, we have up to $399 to spend. Okay, pause it now, and we'll see if we can come up with some amounts. Okay, we're back. So, say dining out. I don't know what you assumed would be reasonable for Hannah. Let's say that she likes to get together with friends once a week. Well, if she's going to go out and eat dinner once a week, what would be the average cost of eating dinner? I don't know, somewhere between $15 and $20 for an entree. You add in a drink. Would it be reasonable that per meal she was looking at about $30? Maybe. Maybe that's a little low. Maybe it would be a little higher. Maybe a nice middle. Well, if Hannah does that once a week, then we're talking about a total for 4 weeks in the month, $120 spent on dining out. So now, what about the cost of movies, let's say? Well, for an adult to go watch a movie, I don't know, do we round that off to about $15 per movie? That's just for an entry ticket. Do you then talk about, okay, dining out? We've already dealt with that as meals with friends. Do you add in popcorn and things? Do you start to talk about, like, that would be another $30 per movie to maybe go see? Well, if that was the case, I don't know if she's going to see a movie every week. But if she likes to go see movies, then maybe we're talking about twice a month. Would it be reasonable to say that that was another $60 in movies? I don't know. Again, we're just making a list of what we think Hannah might like to do. Something that maybe you might like to do. Okay, well, if I did add that up right now, then I'll notice my total variable expenses is $180. If I now took my $399, which is approximately $400, and I take away the $180, that means that she has, for shopping, about, let me just get rid of that, my $220, approximately. Now, I would argue that seems like an awful lot of money to spend on shopping. But if that's the way that she hangs out with her friends, then maybe that's what we have. And so that if that seems the most flexible, then maybe we slot in $220 for shopping per month. Again, seems a lot, but maybe that would be my list of expenses. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of all of the stuff that we see on the bottom, just to make a little bit of space for us to consider something. We talked earlier about, okay, our 50-30-20 rule. Well, does Hannah's budget follow that 50-30-20 rule? So we take a peek then at everything we have in that budget, and you'll notice that what we basically included on the left side may be deemed to be necessary things, those being your needs. You could maybe make the argument that what we have on the right side then would be your wants, your variable amounts. If everything on the left was a need, everything was a need, with the exception of savings, then does Hannah's budget follow the 50-30-20 rule? So let's consider it, make a couple quick calculations. If I want to examine, well, are her needs about 50%? Well, right now, if I took 1,879 and I divided that by 2,328, I'm hoping that we can see that we are breaking our 50% rule. Clearly, the top is not half of the bottom. It's most of the bottom. And we would come in on approximately 80.7%. Like if we were just really easy and said, let's go to the nearest decimal place, the nearest percent, then we're talking that that's about 81%. So Hannah is spending an awful lot of her money on her needs. What that means then is it's leaving maybe very little for her wants. If her wants are the shopping and the dining out and so on, then if we were to take that amount, $399, and divide it by 2,328, then again, we should clearly see this is not going to be 30%. Well, this ends up becoming, and if we follow the same rounding rules, about 17%. Okay, well, if a good budget means 20% should be for her savings, then I think we can see that really Hannah's not living up to that 20% rule. And if we took our 50 and divided it by 2328 and turned that into a percentage, then what we're going to find is Hannah is only saving about 2% of her monthly income. Okay, what does that mean then with regards to a good budget? Well, it means that Hannah is not putting in as much money into savings as what she might like. Which means for that kind of, phrase, that rainy day where she's going to need to draw upon her savings, she might not have enough there to get her through those tough times. If we were to just look at that budget and say 20% of your monthly income should be savings, then that means that Hannah's goal, if we just wanted to look at it as a goal, should have been about $465. Now, I'm hoping we can see that if we bumped up Hannah's savings to $465, that is not going to leave enough for her wants. And that's not a great thing. Yes, if you're putting all of your money into your needs and into your savings, then you can make the argument, are you enjoying your life? You're losing out on all your wants. So does that then mean that really what Hannah needs to try to do is try to limit some of the payments she makes on her needs? Okay, perhaps that means, hey, some of the groceries that she's buying, maybe she needs to try to limit her grocery purchases. It's tough to do. We talk about quality of life. Maybe that means she's not buying the same type of food that she would be buying. Maybe that means she's got to find something else with respect to a cell phone plan. Maybe some of that stuff that she has on her phone, she maybe needs to consider. I don't know, as bad as it could be, does she start to look at it and say, I don't know if I can afford my car? If I start to deal with my car payment and my gas, add on top of that my insurance, okay, that seems to be hurting me quite a bit. Okay, are there other alternatives? Like I have to get rid of my car and maybe I'm taking a bus. Some of the tough decisions that would have to go into how you spend your money. And I hope what we can see from this relatively quick example, budgets help us to see where we need to make some tough decisions. And if we make a good budget, it doesn't mean that we eliminate tough decisions. What it means is we get the information that can help us to make good ones. Okay, what I want you to do now, jump in and play around with our practice activity. Take you through a little aspect of you generating some income and then considering some expenses that you would experience in your life. Okay, I hope this walkthrough for our lesson gave you a good idea of what a budget is and why they're useful. Okay, best of luck with your practice.